Alright, so now we're going to take a look at string arrays as well as arrays of objects. So to start off with, we'll look at string arrays. So we can have arrays of other data types, including class types like string. So the following is going to be the declaration and initialization of a string array. So we've got two different ways we could do this. The one is going to be initializing the individual values. So we can have something like Bill, Susan, Stephen, and Jean for the four different, in this case maybe names for some string array. Alternatively, we could just go ahead and use that constructor for our string. So just go ahead and make an array and we don't have any initial values put into it. The key difference when we're dealing with a string array or just any array of objects is that if we use that particular approach, all of the uninitialized elements are going to hold a null reference. So with our numeric arrays, we saw that they would be initialized to 0 if we didn't specify anything. In this case, they're going to hold a null reference if we don't specify anything. So let's go ahead and actually build out a string array. So come back to NetBeans and kind of put this together. So go ahead and create a new Java application. And let's go ahead and call this one string arrays. Finish that. So go ahead and kind of clean up some of the codes, adjust the style on this a little bit. Okay, and then right here inside of the main method, we'll go ahead and declare and initialize our string array. So the first thing we need is the data type for the individual items. So again, we have to put string, just like we did for int when we were making our int arrays. We then have that pair of brackets to indicate specifically that this is going to be an array of strings. We then give it a name of some kind. So in this case, since this is going to be a string array that holds a bunch of people's names, I'm just going to go ahead and call it names. We can then go ahead and assign to this either the already preset initialized list of names, or we could use the new keyword, and then again using that array constructor, we specify the data type for the individual items, and then have the size of the array in brackets. So in this case, we're going to have 4 different names, so we could do it this way, and then just add the names one at a time. Alternatively, we could go ahead and just, let's say we comment this out and save that as a reference. We could just go ahead and do the same thing, but instead right here, we'll go ahead and put in that list of names, so the individual strings separated by commas, and then inside of curly braces. So the 4 names were going to be Bill, Susan, Stephen, and Jean. So we're going to put those in. So we'll put Bill. Keep in mind that the double quotes only go around the string itself. We then have the commas. Those are going to be outside of that, so make sure that you don't accidentally put the commas into those double quotes. So it was Bill, Susan, Stephen, and Jean. Yeah. Okay. So we've got each one of our 4 different names. Each one has double quotes around it to indicate that it is a string literal. So we'll essentially be creating our 4 different string objects by doing this. And then once we've got this set up, we can access each one of these. So say maybe we want to do something like printing out one of them. We can go ahead and do that. Say names 0. So we can go ahead and specify a particular position in our names array, same as we did with our int array. In this case, it's just going to go grab the string that is at that position. And in this case, we'll go ahead and print that to the console. So if we do this, we're just going to go grab Bill. That's at position 0 of the names array. And so when we run this program, Bill is going to get printed to the console. And in addition to this, we can also call string methods using our array elements that contain these strings. For example, we could use the toUpperCase method specifically on the name at position 0. So we can go ahead and actually use that toUpperCase method on Bill. So we'll go ahead and come back over here. So we've got name 0 right here already, and then we just have to include that dot notation. So we're going to say dot and then toUpperCase. So essentially, we can think of name 0 in much the same way as we think of just a regular string variable, where we would specify the name of the variable, then dot, and then the method that we want to call on it. So in this case, we're going to be calling to uppercase on the string that is at position 0 of names, which is Bill. So now if we run this and we see the output to the console, we're going to see that it's going to be in all capital letters. So that's one of the key differences when you're working with strings or classes, is that now you can actually make use out of the different methods that come with those classes, unlike with your primitive data types like int or maybe double, where they don't have those kinds of methods that you can use. So key distinction there. So now what we'll go ahead and do is take this concept and kind of expand on it a little bit further by considering arrays of our own custom classes. So this is going to be considering it based on classes that you have written yourself. So this will be distinct from classes that came from the Java API. So in this particular example, an array is going to be constructed to hold 3 rectangle objects. So we're going to assume that rectangle is a class that you have written yourself. Keep in mind that each position holds a reference to the object located somewhere else in memory. So in much the same way as our string array, we'll kind of use that as an example of what I'm talking about there. So in this string array, we've created these different objects by just using string literals to just go ahead and implicitly create the different objects. So that means that each one of these different locations in our array technically doesn't have the object itself, but instead, because of the way that strings work, each one of these is going to be a reference. So like when we say name 0 right here, what we're really doing is saying we want to go get first get the reference to that object, and then we'll go grab that object and actually use it right here. So we have a similar approach here, and we also include this visual diagram to kind of show you precisely what I'm talking about, where we first start off by creating our boxes array. So we see we've got rectangle, it's the name of the class, so just like our string, name of the class. We're going to put that first, then that pair of brackets to indicate that it's going to be an array of that particular class, or of objects of that class. We give it a name, in this case boxes. It's going to be equal to a new rectangle array, and again we're going to use the constructor where we specify the type of the individual items, then the brackets, and the size of it inside of those brackets. And so in this particular case, we are going to create this boxes array. So we know that arrays are also treated as objects. They're a specialized class. So we know that boxes will technically have a reference to the array object that's placed somewhere else in memory. So we've essentially got a pointer from boxes to the different items at positions 0, 1, and 2. And then for each one of those items at position 0, 1, and 2, what is actually held at that exact location is going to be a reference to the actual box objects that are somewhere else in memory besides that. So then of course we see more of these arrows pointing off to other locations where you would go find the box objects, and in this particular case we're assuming that for each one of these box objects that we go ahead and give it some values of some kind. So we can go ahead and take a look at this little bit of code that I have right here. For this one, if we come over to NetBeans, I have this project set up already right here. And the reason that I do is because of the fact that I'm going to be making use out of a custom class. So I'm going to go ahead and close string arrays output. So I'm going to be using this custom class right here. So essentially this is what the code inside of one of these class files would look like. It's somewhat similar when you deal with classes in your Java API, naturally because they have slightly more complicated methods than what we're going to be doing here. The code is a little bit more complex, but otherwise the general structure is the same. So in this particular case, we're dealing with this rectangle class. The main things I'm going to be concerned with here are just going to be being able to construct one of these rectangle objects. So that'll look exactly the same as if we were constructing an object of any of our classes from the Java API. Same general structure. And then from there, I want to go ahead and use some of the methods from this rectangle class on those objects. And again, that's also going to be pretty much identical to what we see with classes from the Java API. So we're going to come over to this other file, object arrays. So if you were putting this together, you would go ahead and just create a project called object arrays. This particular file will automatically be created for you in NetBeans. And then you would just go ahead and add this one to that project. So you just choose the package here, go to new Java class, and then from there you can just kind of put all this code together. So if you want to try to get all this code put together and you don't have access to this rectangle file directly, so this is going to be the top portion of it, and then right around here is going to be the rest of it. So if you need to, you can pause the video and get that entire program, that entire file for the program put together. Okay. So coming over to object arrays, go ahead and clean this up a little bit since I just left the default code here. So we'll get rid of all the extra comments that we don't need. We'll clean up the style. Go ahead and remove those extra comments there. And inside of the main method, we're going to go ahead and make our array of rectangle objects. So again, specifying the type of the individual items. So in this case, that's going to be rectangles. So we'll go ahead and put the name of the class, rectangle. So this is exactly the same as what we just did for string. We just put the name of the class, string. We then put that pair of brackets to indicate this is specifically going to be an array of rectangles. We can then go ahead and give it a name. So I'll go ahead and use the same name that we had in the slides example. So I'll go ahead and call it boxes. So this is equal to, use that new keyword, and then we go ahead and use the constructor for our arrays by specifying the type of the individual items again, at the pair of brackets, and inside of there, we're going to go ahead and put in the size. So we'll go ahead and give this one a size of 3. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to do is use a for loop to add the different items to this. So this is going to be very similar to what I did when I was populating our int arrays with different items by using a for loop, or by populating it with different values at each one of the different positions. So we're going to say for int index equal to 0. So again, we start from position 0. We'll keep going for as long as our index is less than the size of boxes. So we're going to get that length field, do boxes.length, and then do index plus plus. And then the one line of code that I'm going to need for this for loop is to just construct a new rectangle object and put that into my array at each one of these different positions. So to get the different positions, we're going to do boxes index. So that much still looks just like all the other times that we've used a for loop with our arrays. Go ahead and say this is equal to, and on this next side, rather than just putting just a simple value like we did with our int array, we would put something like 10 or 20. We're going to go ahead and do all of the construction of a new rectangle object. So we're going to use the new keyword, and we're going to go ahead and say that we want to construct a rectangle object, and we need that pair of parentheses. So this particular part looks pretty much just like whenever you construct things like objects of the scanner class or the random class. So in this case, we're just constructing an object of a class that we happen to write ourselves. Okay. One of the things to note about this, whenever we call this constructor for rectangle, what this is going to go ahead and do is give us a rectangle object whose length is 1 and width is 1. So when we first make this, in a moment I'll kind of do a simple print statement just to see what that looks like. But the next thing I want to go ahead and do is change the values of one of these objects. So to do that, I'm going to be making use out of calling two methods. These two methods are going to be setLength and setWidth. So again, this is going to look kind of like what I did for the string class, where I could call one of the methods on an item at a particular position. So I'm going to do boxes at position 0. So that's just like when I did names at position 0. So that will give me whatever box is at position 0, the rectangle object. So that's going to give me a rectangle object whose length is 1 and width is 1. All three of them are identical. For this particular one, I'm going to go ahead and change those values. So we're going to do setLength. So we use that dot notation. We then use the setLength method, so we're calling that method. And then right here, I'm just going to go ahead and put in a value for what I want to set the length to. So I'm going to go ahead and change the length of this one to 5. And then on the next line, I'm going to go ahead and do this again, but now I'm going to do it for the width. So we're going to grab boxes at position 0, and we'll go ahead and set the width of it. And for this one, again, it's going to be expecting a number right here for what we want to change the width to. So we'll go ahead and put 3 for this one. So after these 2 lines of code execute, our rectangle object, our box at position 0, is going to have a length of 5 and a width of 3. So then, if we want to actually see this, we can go ahead and actually print those fields, or all that data for that object, to the console. So go ahead and do system.out.println, and we'll go ahead and say the length of the rectangle is, so write out this string literal, and then use string concatenation, and then just go ahead and append on boxes 0, and then we're going to use the getLength method. So we're going to say boxes 0, and then the dot, and then the getLength method. And with this method, this will go ahead and just give us whatever value this box happens to have, or this rectangle object happens to have for its length. So if I run just this one line of, or run this program with just this one print statement, you can see that. So we can see right here, the length of the rectangle is, and then 5.0. So it's going to be the length that I just set it to. And then we can do the same thing for the width. So we're going to say the length of the, or the width of the rectangle. The width of the rectangle is, again, we'll use string concatenation, and then we'll say boxes 0 dot get width. And with this line of code, now it's going to go ahead and print out the width of the rectangle, which we set to 3. So now if we run it, we're going to see both of these print statements to the console. So we see the length of the rectangle is 5.0, and the width of the rectangle is 3.0. Alright, so at this point, this is going to wrap up everything for taking a look at arrays of strings as well as arrays of objects. Eventually, if you're following this in the order of doing chapter 7 first and then chapter 6 afterwards, eventually I'm going to address this particular file in more detail. So if you took the time to actually write this out yourself and most of it isn't really making a lot of sense to you, don't worry, eventually I'm going to address this as well. Primarily, I just wanted to be able to show what this would look like here. So once you've had a chance to go through the chapter 6 content, you can come back to this video, watch this again, and at that point, if anything about this wasn't really making a lot of sense by the end, hopefully by that point it will make a lot more sense. But otherwise, that's going to finish up everything for this. Going into the next video, we're going to take a look now at arrays of more than one dimension. So far, we've been using one-dimensional arrays. In the next video, we're going to start working with two-dimensional arrays, and I'll also talk briefly about three-dimensional arrays or higher.